This is the Speaker's Scoop, a behind-the-scenes weekly podcast with Washington House Speaker Lori Jinkins. Speaker Jinkins, what's on your mind this week?
Well, that's a big question. The biggest thing on my mind this week is this is what's known as House Policy Cutoff, which means that all the policy bills in all of our committees have to make it out of committee or they're not going to be considered anymore this year. You know, it's interesting because I was a member for 10 years before I became Speaker of the House. This was a highly stressful week for me because I would be really pushing to make sure that I had heard all the critiques of the bills, of my bills that I was the prime sponsor of, and was trying to do amendments to make sure that I was addressing those critiques. Sometimes I would get a bill to the point of everyone who was a critic and everyone who loved the bill all loving it, and it would move out of committee really easily but then other times fixes that I would make somebody else unhappy. And so sometimes the bill just I wouldn't be able to perfect it in time to get it out of committee. So it's a very, very stressful time for members to try and move their legislation along and to make sure that they're really listening to the voices of people who are affected by their legislation. This is something that we really have focused on as Democrats over the last number of years, is really listening to the people we think we're creating solutions for and making sure we're not just creating our own idea of what a good solution is, but actually listening to people who are affected by things and making sure that they're really guiding how we're moving forward on bills. Now that I'm Speaker, I don't prime sponsor legislation anymore. I like to say that I love all of my children the same, so I love all the bills that move on the same. So I don't have quite that kind of pressure, but I do have members who come to me with problems with their bills and want some help or want some advice about what to do. And then next week, we'll have a number of these policy bills that have a fiscal impact, and they have to go to a second committee, the Appropriations Committee. And that committee really screens the fiscal impact of legislation. And even if the legislation is really good and it's something that we want to do, the Appropriations Committee has to think about what our budget looks like in a year like this and whether or not we can afford to do that, especially if it's something new that we haven't done before. I would imagine that this year, when we have a budget deficit that's at least $12 billion, it's likely that we won't be starting very many new things this year. I can't say we won't start any, but we'll be looking to kind of shore up programs that have been successful, that are working for people around the state, and that are really needed by the people of the state, whether those are, food programs, K-12 education programs, healthcare, higher ed, all kinds of things like that. So we will then get to the fiscal cutoff a week from Friday. So this Friday is policy cutoff. Next Friday is fiscal cutoff. And if your bill doesn't make it out of the fiscal committee, then it won't move on this year. And all bills end up going as they move on. If they make it into the rules committee, that's the last committee they stop in before going to the floor. And I can talk another time about all the work of the Rules Committee as we get more and more bills that move there. So we have members just working day and night right now, trying to get their bills in the right kind of shape to move on. And in the meantime, our budget team is in the background doing budget work every night and every day. We have a 105-day session, and we're a little bit over 40 days through session, so we're moving along at a faster clip than anybody here wants to because of all the work there is to do. But that's what's mostly on my mind this week, and I have to admit I'm a little bit glad that I don't prime sponsor bills anymore because it's a really hard week, and it's actually great to be able to work with members, helping them move their bills along.
What does a dead bill mean?
I could answer that a bunch of different ways. In the first year of a biennium, which is what we're in now, every bill that's filed, even if it doesn't make it through committee this year, next year it will stay in that committee. It could be heard again. It could be moved out of committee next year, and it can pass and go to the Senate and end up getting signed by the governor in the second year of the biennium. There are bills that will pass just in the very first year of the biennium, too. I think one of the misnomers is, I don't know really what a good word would be to describe a bill that's, I guess, put to sleep for many, many months, but it's not dead in the first biennium. It is not alive for this session, though. If it doesn't pass by policy cutoff and it doesn't pass by fiscal cutoff, if it has a fiscal impact. There's probably a whole nother podcast I can do on bills that are necessary to implement the budget and those bills that are exempt from cutoff. And maybe that's a great other thing that I should talk about at some point. There are bills that are exceptions always to any rule we have in the legislature. Isn't that just like life?
Speaker Lori Jinkins, when we catch up with you again next week, cutoff will have happened, policy cutoff. So I'm sure we'll have more to talk about then.
Thanks, Jen.